Hey, how's it going? Good morning. I am in this episode of Home Water Dispatch. I'm on Eleuthera in the Bahamas, Cape Eleuthera, and in particular this place called Kemps Creek. It's pretty influential location for me, very important, near and dear to my heart. These were my home waters for a number of years, and the location where myself and a bunch of other collaborators and students did some really neat research on bonefish. And it worked in conjunction with the Cape Eleuthera Institute, which is a facility just down the coast to the west here. And the combination of having that research station with a saltwater flow through seawater system and lab space in conjunction to the proximity to places like this just make it really easier to do some really neat research. Back in the day, we started out doing some catch and release science on bonefish and looking at how they respond to air exposure and handling time and all sorts of things. And actually a lot of the science that has gone into the best practices for catch and release on bonefish, the science was done here. Including some stuff back in the lab, and I have links to all of that on my Fish Forward website, all those papers and science, and there's actually too much to go over on an episode of Home Water Dispatch, but that's why this place is important, that being able to do a lot of controlled science and how fish are responding to catch and release really led up to those science-based best practices. Keep Fish Wet now has a campaign called Bonefish in Our Hands, where they've translated all that science to make it accessible to anglers and governments and other folks that care. So you can go check out that information. I'll put a link in the description for this YouTube episode. Other neat things about this location. The bonefish right now, the tide is low and coming in, and there's no polarizer on this. I apologize, I forgot it. But there's actually a school of bonefish that's slowly working their way back in with the tide. There's some lemon sharks that are milling about and some stingrays, and it's just a fabulous, example of a really neat coastal ecosystem, a mangrove creek in the Bahamas. And having, we're obviously, as an angler, we think about how bonefish are moving in and out of creeks like this. As a scientist, we are always thinking about what that represents in terms of movement ecology, the movement of energy and matter, because, bonefish mull about in the bottom eating shrimps and crabs, and then the tide goes out and they go and they feed out there maybe, but they're also pooping out there. So thinking about the role of bonefish in the ecosystem, that's kind of a really cool thing to ponder, and it's interesting to have a system like this where you can experiment and do studies on them. This was also a location where, to understand their movement ecology, we started using acoustic telemetry, putting out receivers, a couple way up in the creek, some out in the mouth of the creek, up and down the coastline. And this is where we started to understand their connection with the tides, understand their connections with the temperatures, quantifying that movement ecology. It was this location and a couple other tidal creeks where we would see bonefish, their detections on the receivers kind of go way down during the full and new moon in November through April. And that's how we slowly discovered that they went further to the west to the pre-spawning aggregation site, and then eventually made their way out to the drop off of the Exuma Sound to spawn. And then the next day they were back up in these creeks. A really cool use of that technology to understand the connectivity of bonefish and how they connect the ecosystem and how they use different parts of the ecosystem for their life history. Not only just here, in the shallow tidal creeks and out to, maybe a little bit deeper water on the Bahamas bank, but also how they then move to these transitional habitats and then even use very deep water for part of their life history. That's really critical because they're spawning, right? And spawning means more babies and hopefully help supporting the population in the future. Other things that were done here, because we were able to monitor the movement patterns of bonefish in and out of the tidal creeks, and we also put temperature loggers, and we were able to look at how the acclimation temperature and how bonefish responded to higher water temperatures, and obviously in the face of climate change, that's important. But even that even couples back into some of the catch and release science, where as we're following bonefish that were being tracked after angling, we saw some bonefish basically succumb to the heat, they didn't die because they were attacked by a barracuda or a shark. They were caught in very warm water, and as they were swimming away, when we tracked them for a little bit of time, and they just rolled over and died. This brings to light this idea that, yes, we are someplace relatively warmer. I am right now anyway. We think that tropical species or subtropical species like bonefish might be more adapted to heat. But that study also, I think, shed some light on this idea that, bonefish might actually be relatively, and other tropical species might actually be close to their thermal maxima. And so understanding how they're responding to the rapidly changing temperatures related to climate change, and then how do we interface with them as anglers during those times where we want to minimize the impacts on them, so that they survive and they can go back and do their spawning and support the population and all that other stuff. So really neat bonefish stuff done here. We also did some movement ecology on lemon sharks, and we did some movement ecology on barracuda. And since then, there's been a series of lots of other really cool science done out of the Cape Eleuthera Institute. But I just wanted to use this episode of Home Water Dispatch to really summarize or hit home how important a location like this is, how important it is to have, or useful it is to have, a facility like the Cape Eleuthera Institute to basically, as a home base, to facilitate a lot of this research. The Institute, because it's in conjunction with the Cape Eleuthera Island School, that meant that there was a lot of capacity building with high school students getting involved in the research. There was connections to Deep Creek, which is a local community in a middle school, and those students, back in the day, we were having them getting involved and thinking more about bonefish and the role of bonefish, obviously, in the Bahamian economy and the cultural heritage. On the dime, there's a bonefish on it, so there's some significance to that. And so, I think that I'm going to end here and go see if I can convince one of these bonefish to eat a fly. If not, I'm just going to enjoy this space and reconnect with what used to be my home waters, and which are the home waters for bonefish and home waters for people here in the Bahamas, and thinking more about the types of research that we can continue to do in the future to create more informed advocates and activists for, taking care of home waters in the face of climate change and other demands on human society and demands on our ecosystems and everything else. So anyway, I'm going to stop there. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Home Water Dispatch, and I will see you again soon. Bye. It's still rolling. What's it going? Uh-oh.